Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Best greetings to you. Today we're going to be talking about foster care. So it means how we take care of the children apart from their families in foster families until the child or his or her parents decide to actually manage to overcome all the difficult life circumstances. So we're talking about the tool that provides for fundamental rights of the child for family care. And it's very important to talk about the implementation of foster care in Ukraine. We're going to talk about our real experience as well as the outcomes we have managed to achieve so far. And we're going to talk as well what needs to be done for the foster care services to be accessible for all children and their families who most need that all across Ukraine. So today this broadcast is watched by many people from all the corners of Ukraine, and we definitely know that we are watched by the representatives of government, services for children, social services, civil society, and actually foster families. I mean, those who have to do with the service delivery in Ukraine. Hopefully this discussion will be of great interest for the parents who we also welcome to join us. And this is a very important agenda and the mission. So we want to encourage them to become foster parents. We also want to address you, dear viewers, to please take part in the discussion, ask questions to our speakers, and you can share your comments on the YouTube channel where we are now webcasting this event. And last but not least, this event is handled in two languages, English and Ukrainian. So if you want other country representatives to join our discussion, you can actually share the link to them and they can watch it in the English language. And now it is high time to introduce our today's speakers. This is Ruslan Kolbasa, Director General of the Directorate for the Development of Social Services at the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine. Daniel Leigh Sanford Amar, Director of Alinea International Ltd. In Ukraine and Director of Surge Project in Ukraine. Vasilina Debailo, Director of the international charitable organization called Partnership for Every Child. Irina Semenko, expert of the initiative to develop services for children and families under the Surge Project. A little bit later, we're going to also engage two more speakers. This is Irina Malenchuk, the Global Director for the demo programs of LUMOS Foundation, and Evgenia Goncharenko, a foster parent from Peromaisk in Kharkiv region. So let us take a look at how foster care looks right now in Ukraine from the real experience standpoint. And let's look into the faces of those parents who have enough love to love actually not only their children, but all the children. Let us try to analyze from this video how this foster care program today works in Ukraine in the communities. My name is Natalia Dudko, and together with my husband, we're the first foster family under the pilot program.
Кожна дитина. Ровно 10 лет тому назад у нас в семье появился первый ребенок. И вот за это время у нас было их 57.
Більшість соціально розвинутих країн дитині
In most socially developed countries, if a child
жорстокого поводження пропонують не лікарню, притулок чи інтернат, а тимчасову фостерну сім'ю. У нас називають її патронатною. Патронат забезпечує тимчасовий догляд, виховання та реабілітацію дитини в сім'ї патронатного вихователя на період подолання нею чи її батьками складних життєвих обставин. Дитина за будь-яких обставин зростає та розвивається в безпечному сімейному середовищі, уникаючи потрапляння до інтернатних закладів. Фінансування послуг патронату здійснюється за рахунок державного бюджету.
Сейчас гораздо проще, легче, потому что есть очень существенная поддержка от государства, как финансово, так и правовая.
Це новий вид послуг, це не прийомна сім'я. Ми не можемо називати дітей своїми дітьми, вони не можуть нас назвати татом і мамою. І це дуже стислі строки. І нам потрібно реабілітувати дитину, виховати її. Ти починаєш комунікувати, починаєш зв'язувати, починаєш вкладувати себе. Це людина може проявити навіть себе в цьому.
Якщо ти готовий до цієї професії, ти осознано йдеш. Можна за місяць зібрати документи. Головне, щоб ти цього хотів, твоя сім'я підтримувала тебе, це саме перше. Наша донька, вона нас підтримала, тобто вона не була проти, вона така за дітей.
Детей, которые нуждаются в такой поддержке, очень много. И не все попадают, к сожалению, под патронат.
Меня зовут Лиза, мне 19 и живу в Киеве. У меня есть сын. Если бы не патронат, было бы нехорошо. Маленькая, беременная, то почему бы не пойти? Это большой шанс быть с ребенком рядом. Если, конечно, для девушки важно, чтобы ребенок был с ней. Поддержка. Советы. Я могу позвонить в любую минуту, со мной всегда поговорят.
Мы все время стараемся поддерживать отношения с биологическими родителями, потому что успех патроната – это когда ребенок возвращается в биологическую семью. И тогда детям более понятно, что их не бросают, что их не опять от них не отказываются, а их просто как бы вот помещают в ту ситуацию, в которой им будет лучше.
Батьки отримують комплексну підтримку соціальних працівників та можливість спілкуватися зі своєю дитиною.
Если бы в патронат я не попала бы, я бы только вот сейчас забрала бы своего ребенка год назад. И я была бы ему чужим человеком.
Патронат – это огромная семья. В этой семье принимают участие все. Медицина, милиция, службы, психологи – все. Патронат должен процветать в нашей стране.
Наша громада об'єдналася одна з перших на Черкащині у 2015 році. За цей час ми взяли на себе майже всі повноваження. Перша необхідність була, як зробити, щоб у нас була своя патронатна сім'я. Тому що бачимо, що це вкрай необхідно. Держава дає можливість, підтримку і не користуватися цим. Це, я вважаю, це неправильно.
Дитина залишається у своїй громаді максимально наближена до родини, свого соціального оточення та спеціалістів, які надають підтримку її батькам.
І служби, які в нас є, служба в справах дітей, і фахівці в соціальному центрі, вони постійно ведуть контроль, чи треба віддавати батькам, чи батьки поміняли свою думку, чи не поміняли. Влада готова завжди піти на допомогу тим, хто хоче це зробити. Це питання майбутнього, і щоб дітям було краще у патронатній сім'ї, чим їх вилучають в будинки малютки, в будинки-інтернати. Це майбутнє нашої держави.
Патронат у громаді – швидка і вчасна допомога дитині і її сім'ї подолати складні життєві обставини. Якщо ви готові стати патронатним вихователем, зверніться до спеціалістів місцевого центру соціальних служб.
So, whenever you're ready to become a foster parent, you can go to the local social service centers. And from the video, you may have seen that foster care is a real opportunity to maintain family relationship for the child and the parents. So my first question goes to the representative of the ministry, Mr. Ruslan Kolbasa. I would like to ask you, Ruslan, do you think through foster care we can actually achieve the ultimate goal and help protect the family for the child? Well, first of all, the number of foster families we have in Ukraine, it should grow, of course. Every year and every day, each local community needs to have more and more families like this who are ready to accept the child and take care of him or her. So it is the objective of both the central and local governments to do everything possible for the responsibility for the child and those people who are ready to do everything for not to remove, to make sure the child is not removed from families. So together with the all joint efforts together, we want to make sure we provide the best child welfare opportunities. I love the opinion of the leader of that local community who has the understanding and is responsible for the child. So he does everything possible for the child to stay in the family, stay in the community. And this foster family, the foster parents, is the right solution when one family can provide a lot and solve a lot of problems. We used to have those many institutions, rehab centers under the ministry. They have to be replaced by foster families. And this is now a responsibility of so many heads of local communities who now have more and more understanding of what service for children has to do, what social workers will have to be involved in. First of all, they have to identify, protect follow up and support the children and the families whenever they have any difficult life circumstance. So it's just a temporary accommodation of the child at the foster family. And this is, I think, a great opportunity to do everything possible for the child never to be removed, neither from the community nor from the family. How much big the demand is for such services? How many cases do you think, in what cases foster care would be the most relevant? We have a lot of orphans in the family. And that's the child that is deprived, whose parents are deprived of parental rights. But only 30% of them are real orphans. All the others have living parents. And that's not happening overnight. That's been happening for such a long time. And that requires attention from professionals, courts, and everything. And all this turbulent situation traumatizes the child a lot. That's why we now have the Social and Psychological Rehabilitation Center. There are 79 all over in Ukraine, and they are completely packed because the number of children that reside there is growing every year. So for us, that's a greatly needed opportunity to have more foster families. You were talking about thousands, but how many foster families have been out there in Ukraine already, and how many children had access to these services? Well, 219 according to the recent data. That's the number of the foster families, and around 1,000 children have already gone through those families. They've been to those families. They were taken care of. Then they went back home to their natural parents, and this is just a temporary way to find solutions to the problems. There are big hopes for it, and there is a big pressure on it as well, because they are the first respondents to come over and help both the child and the family. That was a very valuable information in the video that from a foster parent, that it actually combines efforts of the many stakeholders, the police, social services, and the parents themselves. So the child can communicate with the biological family, and we need to do as much as we can to have this participatory approach or multidisciplinary approach to best help the child and work in the best interest of the child. So that's why we're talking about the need for growing the number of such foster families in Ukraine. And I could also say that we are trying to support this initiative from the state, because support for the child in a foster family is actually funded by the state. Actually, the funds are allocated from the state budget to the foster families. So we have actually increased the funding amount 2.5 times of the minimum wage in Ukraine, the living wage in Ukraine. So today we need to consider the issue of how much more we can support foster families from the state and do everything possible to encourage such families to actually allow their child to stay with a foster family for quite a while without institutionalizing the child. That's the biggest effort that we need to right now engage in to change the situation and the system. How can we encourage families to do that? First of all, we need to show the responsibility of the local community leadership over that child, because what we are having today, what kind of incentive there can be for a leader of the local community, apart from understanding that the child needs support, apart from understanding that something wrong might happen and the situation might be even worse. Maybe that child will never go to school. Maybe tomorrow, just a small school in the local community will be closed. And those are just examples from real life. I mean, some of the leaders in the local communities are trying to do everything possible to actually try to retain those children, to help them. And for that, we need to also think about the financial incentives from the central government level down to the communities. So if there is a family, we better try to help the family early enough not to make it, and that is much cost effective. So therefore, we need to encourage both the families and local leadership. If that's not happening in the early stage, maybe we might think about something, some of the solutions of a more serious scale. And you were mentioning that around 10,000 children um, uh, become parentless every year, and some of them end up in the institutional care facilities. But can foster care prevent institutionalization of those children? Well, I think probably around the year 2000, the similar question was asked when we had ambitious plans to create the holistic foster care framework and system to avoid institutionalization. We want to do everything possible for the children to be taken care in families. There was just a very insignificant number of foster families in those days, but Ukraine managed to have more than 3,200 foster families. And once we have the figure of 10,000 children every year, we have 96 to 97% of children now go to foster families or adoptive families, I'm sorry. But I'm sure the Ukraine can pursue the same path by encouraging more foster care instead of adoption. And that is something that we could do not to create more orphans. I mean, those who have living parents but still end up in institutions. I think those reforms can be put together, which is deinstitutionalization, healthcare, and education reforms, together with the decentralization reform. They need to go hand in hand together. We're not talking about small steps, but still the outcomes already positive, and they have proven to be quite efficient. So we now have enough understanding that foster care is something that we really need. Since we already have established amalgamated communities, now we're trying to do everything possible to have services for children in each and every community. Okay, we have not a very positive situation because those social services at the local level are understaffed, but nevertheless, we want to build this infrastructure that is human-centered and child-centered with a participatory approach where many services and stakeholders try to help both the child and the family. This has to be implemented with a holistic approach, and I'm sure we're going to get to the positive results very soon as we did it before with adoptive children and adoptive families. Thank you, Ruslan. Like we already heard, despite quite a substantial support to foster care from the state, nevertheless, it's developing very slowly. There are 200 or 219 foster families right now in Ukraine. That's all across the country. As you may guess, for such a big country like ours, that's not enough. It will not suffice to prevent institutionalization of children. So in order to study the best practice and the available and the current situation in Ukraine and to find the gaps in the development of foster care, a research has been conducted, and we have gotten together here to actually learn more about the findings. And that was the SURGE project that supported the research, and the director of SURGE is Tanya Sanford Amar. So I'd like to ask you now, what do we have to pay attention to closely in Ukraine to develop foster care in Ukraine, and why?
A great question. And I think we have to divide it into two. I think first there is the foster care service itself, but then we also have the broader context of the social welfare system for children. And Ruslan's touched on a couple of those issues. But it's very important for us to understand, again, that foster care is temporary. It is really meant to give us a time and space to be able to address issues within the family, issues with the child in question. And so it's not meant to be a long-term solution. we'll get to some of the gaps in terms of development of foster care in the country. As you said, one of the biggest ones is the fact that it's not available everywhere, and trying to recruit people to become foster parents is something that is still, I think it's a challenge everywhere, not just in Ukraine. But I would also say first that I congratulate the great Ukrainian government for taking this on, because I think foster care is an incredibly important first step to be able to give us that time and space to work with children and families on an individual basis. And that would be my second point. For our child welfare system to work, it has to be child-centric. The child has to be absolutely in the center of the system. And while we do consider children, I think there's a lot of other things that come into the equation. We're looking at parents' rights. We're looking also at what is really comfortable for the state, for local governments. And sometimes it's easier, to put everybody in a one-size-fits-all type of institution. Everything is there. And sometimes even for parents, I think it could be seen as, not a bad solution, right? Because the child is fed, the child is clothed, the child is educated. There's an understanding that, in an institution, the child's needs, special needs are being taken care of. But we know that institutionalization is not a good solution, because often that short period of time becomes a longer period of time, and then you have a child that's raised in an institution. And we know from the research that's been done here that children do not do well in institutions. So I want to be clear, I'm not criticizing social workers and not my dear friend here, Ruslan, or the Ministry of Social Policy, because I think the reason why social workers, why local governments encourage families to put their children into institutions is that's the only option they have. It's the only tool and approach. I mean, social workers work within a system. They can only work within the framework of the law, with the tools, the resources that they're given. And I can imagine being a social worker in a local community and having a family come to me with a child with special needs. I mean, what do? You have the institution on one side that has been offering services to families and children for decades, right? Or nothing. So the institution in that context seems better than nothing. And so I think the challenge for us is building a system of community services, of services for children, services for families, to help them resolve whatever issues are going on that would lead them to take this incredibly difficult step of putting their child in an institution. And I think, as Ruslan said, this calls for more resources. Absolutely, we need to put money against this issue. This is an incredibly important issue. We have almost 100,000 children in institutions. I mean, that tells you the need. And I think, as Ruslan said, 90% of them have families. So that tells you that we are dealing primarily with any issue that you have, whether it's economic issues, social issues of the parents, or special needs of children. We're dealing with it by putting kids in institutions rather than dealing with those issues on an individual basis. So to me, that's the biggest thing. Let's use foster care is wonderful, but it's temporary, and we need to take that opportunity to fix the problems with that family and prevent the children from going into institutions.
Дякую, пані Таня. Якщо я правильно розумію,
Thank you, Tanya. If I understand you correctly, what you mean is the system needs to change the focus on the needs of the child and change the focus from the institutions and rights of the parents.
system should be more child-centric rather than care about institutionalization and maybe parents' needs defending.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do I mean by child-centric? It's that every decision we make, the policies we develop, are about the child's rights and their best interest, whatever is in the best interest of that child. And again, we do have to consider parental rights, parental obligations. We do have to consider the resources that are at our disposal. But I think one of the problems we have is that we haven't fully renovated the system, the child welfare system since Soviet times. And the long-standing approach we had was putting kids in institutions. And I would really challenge that because Ukraine has moved so far away from its Soviet past. And we know that there were reasons why institutions were preferred. I mean, it was well known that this was the best way to raise a child, was to have the state rather than parents be a major influencer. So I think it's high time that that Soviet past is left behind. I think, again, for the success of Ukrainian children, we need to focus on modern methods, making sure that children are raised in some sort of family type atmosphere rather than in institutions where we know the vast majority of children that come out of them in the high, 80%, are not successful. They're at high risk of criminality, high risk of suicide, high risk of having children as teenagers and repeating that cycle. And then, of course, they've not had the benefit of having a family behind them. So this is institutionalization and lack of individualized services is something that is a vicious cycle that we need to stop now and put our resources behind services that are built on the needs of individual children.
Спасибі вам, пані Таня, за таку розлогу і ясну відповідь.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for this very comprehensive answer. And we would also like to invite Irina Milanchuk, the Global Director from LUMOS Foundation. Irina, good afternoon. Excuse me. So we're going to wait until we have the sound. We cannot hear you yet, but we can see you. Is your mic on?
Sorry. I want to start again in this case. I want to say Dobrого dня, Pani and Panova. And I am the Global Director of Programs within LUMOS Foundation. LUMOS Foundation is based in UK. And our mission is to support the governments to transform the systems of care for children, to support the governments to implement the DI reforms. We are supporting Ukraine also in this way and not alone, together with other partners. And I want also to congratulate the government of Ukraine for the leading role within this reform and for the willingness to implement such an unpopular and complicated reform, which links with many other reforms. But today we are talking about foster care, and I was asked to talk about experience of foster care in other countries, and specifically in Czech Republic. And I will start with a quote of a foster parent, if it's fine for you, and I'll read it because I want to read it correctly. A foster parent from Czech Republic said, it is a beautiful, demanding, and responsible work to be a foster care. Being a foster care, you learn not to be selfish, and you understand that the earth and universe are not revolving around us only. Also, a child, an adult who grow in an institution said, it's my goal of life that when I will have children one day, I will try my best so that they won't end up in a children's home or any other institutions. And I wanted to start with these quotes because they are sensible, and I think that we all agree with this. The question addressed to me was what is important and how the foster care system can look like in order to be successful. And I think that there are many elements which have to be taken into account in this process, but one of the most important are human resources, are these foster care parents. And again, a study carried out in Czech Republic show when people have been asked why they want to be foster carers, the answer was that it's to do something meaningful in their life And we, in such way, answer more than 80% of participants in this study. And also, because it was multiple answers question, another answer was also 88% of people answer that they don't want to children to go in institutions. They want to be fostered in order to prevent institutionalization of children in their country. But to be a good person and human, it's not sufficient. And I think the main elements of foster care and service is, first of all, legal framework. Second one would be to have a system of selection, assessment, approval, and training of foster cares. And again, in Czech Republic, all foster cares are initially trained. It's a 24-hour training initial for information, and after that they have a longer training initial, which depends on the type of foster. It is long-term, short-term, it's for babies, for children with disabilities, for children with behavior problems, and so on. And after that, they receive training annually. Another element of foster care system, it's to understand that foster care doesn't mean only foster care parent. It is necessary to have a system of foster care, meaning you have to have social workers who will monitor and support social foster care parents. And the number, it has to be regulated how many foster care families have to be monitored and supported by a social worker, and what would be the frequency of these monitoring visits to the families. Another a child protection officer have to support and monitor children in foster care, and we have to have both, one for parents, another one for children. Also, we need to ensure access to universal services. We know that in many countries, parents, foster care parents, they face problems with access to educational services of children placed in foster families, access to health services, and many other types of access to services. What else I missed? I think
Based on your international experience, could you please comment on how effective the service is regarding child's reintegration back to the family? What have you been observing while working in numerous countries?
As was mentioned at the beginning in this meeting by Mr. Ruslan Kolbasai and by the parent, foster parent who talked at the beginning, reintegration back into the biological family is very important. And communication and connection between child and family, foster family and biological family is crucial, and it helps to keep this foster also sustainable for a child. And the goal has to be reintegration back to the family, especially for emergency and short-term foster care. But not only. Reintegration is important, I would say shortly.
Well,
and it is observed in many countries, especially from emergency and short-term foster care. From long-term is also possible and usual, but less.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ms. Malanchuk.
It was my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. It is an honor to participate in this event today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. И далее...
And now we're moving to Ms. Nedbailo, Vasilina Nedbailo, from Partnership for Every Child, Charitable Foundation. You were the first one to have adopted this practice in Ukraine, and you've been supporting these developments in Ukraine. So tell us a bit about what worked in Ukraine in terms of foster care and what didn't. Thank you. We were indeed the first ones who, back in 2009, had initiated foster care, and we used to call it, like in most of the countries they do, just short-term or emergency foster family. With the development of this practice, we've seen some good results, especially for the children, and that's the most important thing. And that's something that has worked most of all. We try to make sure that children were either reintegrated back to their biological families or received a new family on a permanent basis, so they never ended up in an institution care facilities. So what actually worked as well, we managed to establish professional work together, which has been helping really in achieving great results in most difficult foster care cases. We're going to listen to the presentation about the research and its findings. So I'm not going to be telling you about everything, but anyways, we managed to integrate that into the alternative care system. However, it's not yet completely defined in our legislation, but we're trying to pursue this system, and there should be the alternative care principle enshrined in all the UN documents. It has to be adopted here. So based on this temporary care, we managed to implement this in Ukraine. We also managed to break the backbone of that system that Tanya mentioned, that typical in a traditional case, it was to send a child to the closest institution and forget about him or her. But there are many community leaders and professionals in the communities who trust this system, and they truly believe that the children have to stay in their families, in their community, and could never change the normal living environment, even in case he or she needs support from foster care. And it's very good that we have such people. What's bad about this, there are not too many people, but hopefully we're going to have much more people like this. Or maybe all the communities in Ukraine will trust their children are there to stay. Maybe they will procure foster care services. You never know. But we also, what's important to mention here and express my gratitude for this, we managed to build this network of dedicated and highly professional, extremely sensitive people to the needs of the children. We also managed to create this network of foster parents and their assistants, so to say. Those people live by giving support to the children. We also managed to attract some very good instructors and trainers who work with foster parents. We haven't yet integrated everything into the system because the systems are different. There are different reforms on the way. And of course, it takes time because things get changed. But one of the issues is our labor code. Many people do not get a clue why this is about service delivery, why this is this can be called employment, an employment opportunity, because we have the obsolete labor code since 1981. So we have to update it greatly. We managed to change the people's mindset. I mean, who try to support foster families. Somebody is trying to help them with things or by organizing some events for children. Somebody else is giving financial support, which is also great. But a lot has to be done in this respect because foster care is a new thing. This is kind of an innovation despite we've had the state support for it in the last 10 years. Regarding the support from the central budget, that's also great because it ensures opportunities for sustainable development of foster care, but sometimes it's difficult to convince some of the people to abide by the legislation. In some of the cases, those foster parents cannot get their payments on time, and sometimes it takes time and they have to wait until their payments arrive. I'm sure children can actually be taken care of without institutions once the system is properly developed. From the systems that I've known of, and I've been keeping track of those systems, and I'm talking to many of the professionals about this, we're all sure that foster care is about the child, for the child, and indeed the child is there in the center. And in focus. So we need to make sure these services, like foster care, develop on and on. It should be the effort of everybody. Let us, each and every one of us, do everything possible for foster care to thrive in Ukraine. So what hasn't worked? Can you speak about gaps? Well, I think a lot of gaps were identified in the research, but I partly mentioned this about what hasn't worked. Well, it seems to me that one of the things that we wanted most of all is that every person that is involved in the rights of children to be convinced and to believe that this is much a better option for both the child and the family. And let us be honest with ourselves and with the others. There are some of the families who are contracted as foster parents, but they never receive children, while the children get institutionalized. I know some cases when there are several families available in a community, and there are training materials available, but they keep saying, okay, there is no one to deliver the training to the foster families. But that's so hypocritical. I mean, I'm sure the opportunities are there, but you know, we need the go-getters. We need the people who are not just waiting, but go and do something about this. Thank you, Vasilina. And actually, we have an opportunity to hear the foster parents, to see them and hear from their own experience. And that's the first-hand experience. Evgenia Honcharenko, a foster parent from Kharkiv region, the town of Pervomaisk. She'll get connected through the video communication. Thank you. I can hear you. Great. We can hear you too. Thank you for joining us. And first of all, tell us a bit more why you decided to be a foster parent. Well, I became one because I've known a lot about social orphanage. And I learned about it since my early years, since my teenage years, because I watched a movie called The Orphanage Master, something like this. And I dreamed to be one the other day. But then I decided to become a teacher. And I'd worked for more than 20 years in the daycare facility. So I always tried to help those children in difficult life situations and circumstances, as well as their parents. Well, I learned about foster care from the social advertising on a local TV station. So I already had my adult son, and he already received his master's degree. Well, my children supported me in this endeavor. And well, we realized that, okay, my son wants to go to the postgraduate school, and we were just, my husband and I had a nice new phase of our relationships when, you know, the children are grown up, they already try to take care of themselves, but we wanted to take care of a child. We just got used to it. My husband decided to be my voluntary assistant. And we called the foster care hotline, we collected all the paperwork, and we passed the primary selection back in 2017. And then after, we were invited for a training at the Kharkiv Social Service Center. You know, the training was so fast. It was really comprehensive and useful. I'm so grateful to our instructors from the center. And already in December 2017, we received a recommendation and a certificate of being eligible to become foster parents. And we signed an agreement with the local community leadership. And already later we became the foster parents. So you wanted to take care of someone. So tell me, please, how many children have you had so far? Over the last 3.5 years, our family has had 8 children between 2 and 12 years old. Are you still in touch with them? Do you know about how they live right now? Yes, of course. Because, these children are in our community, they are from our town, and we still support each other. We maintain good relationships with the adoptive parents and with the biological parents as well, so depending on the situation. So we're sometimes invited to come to their homes, so we get some gifts and go visit them. Sometimes we receive gifts back from the children, pictures, drawings, and stuff. It's so touchy, and for such, even though the period of time was relatively short, but you still left your footprint in that family and in that child. Yeah, that's a good reason to continue those meetings with those children. But can you share with us, why do you think the what do you think about the foster care advantages for the child? Well, I believe the benefit for the child is that the child stays in the family, in a natural environment. There's access to school or a daycare facility. The child has an opportunity to talk to friends. The child can talk to the biological family. These children also have an opportunity to go to after-school sections, going for sports, art classes, or whatever. They have access to health care. And also, our children have been enjoying the resource center classes, speech therapists, child therapists. Not always biological parents can actually provide for all those services for the child. Thank you very much, Eugenia, for your comments, and thank you for sharing your own experience. We want to thank you very much for what you've done and still doing. Thanks for the contribution into the development of our communities. Thank you. And it is high time right now to speak about the research findings. That's the initial goal while we came here. And now I'm giving the floor to Irina Semenko. She's an expert on on community-based services from Surge Project. Thank you very much. In my presentation, I would like to make the key emphasis of our quality research on practices of foster care implementation in Ukraine. That is based on the research of existing practices and barriers to foster care. And also, we try to research practices of foster care families, the challenges they've been facing so far, including in selection, training, and support. I'd like to mention this research is the first one regarding foster children. Hopefully, it's going to be a reliable platform to be taking measures both now and in the future. There are 8 regions that we covered in the study. The key criteria were the number of foster care families. We also engaged some of the regions with 0 foster care and 0 foster parents. Luckily, we don't have those anymore. So we decided to engage different target groups, and you can see them here on the slide. I'd like to thank all the respondents who have taken part in this research for their dedicated time, for their honest views. And what's important to mention here that the relevance and urgency of foster care was not actually doubted by any of the respondents in the target groups. So we've seen where the 200 children went to. In accordance with the Ukrainian statistic, you can see most of the children came back to their families, to their original families, or they were adopted, which means that the services actually reach the ultimate goal. If the child goes back to the biological family, in most of the cases, foster parents continue communicating with the child and with the biological family members. It was really bitter when sometimes the respondents mentioned that some of the children get institutionalized since they've had their experience, since they've had dear feelings to those children and attachment. They were really, really concerned about that. Actually, what's important to say here, these children were removed from their families because of the threats to their life and health. And that's what the foster parents normally face. Poor care in the biological family, no skills, poor development in a child. So children may actually end up in a foster care family in an emergency situation, but still there are so many issues that have to be solved right here, right now, to satisfy the child's needs and serve in the best interest of the child. As the foster parents mentioned, there are some of the priority needs. They try to actually provide basic necessities, and they try to actually take the child for medical examination. Some of the children need psychological assistance. And in the scheduled and emergency placement, if that's possible, just to put it that way, not all the information was given to the foster parents beforehand. However, there is a procedure. There were no medical cards, nor there were any other papers that would be important for the foster family to learn more about the child. If the foster parents told us more about the formal preparation of the child, the civil servants said that right now there are no clear descriptions of how the child can get prepared for foster care. Who should be there? A psychologist? What must be told to the child? So they had ambiguous information about all this. At the same time, in scheduled placement, they had talked about some of the cases which are successful when there was information about the child. There was prior communication with the child, which can be considered as best practice. So in this interdisciplinary approach, a lot was mentioned that there is need to incorporate child psychologists, speech therapists, and other professionals who can take care of the child. And the problem is that most of those specialists sometimes are not available, especially in rural areas. So this access to the free medical services is sometimes a challenge. If there is no specialist like this, they have to be engaged on a paid-for basis. Most of the difficulties also happen with access to free medical services, because the foster parents reported they had been facing so many different illnesses and diseases. Even sometimes there were cardiac diseases that required serious treatment. Foster parents also complained about lack of opportunity for inclusive education at school, because the child's status in a foster care is just temporary, so the schools actually were reluctant to organizing inclusive services at a school at the local level. There's also lack of state benefits if the child needs specialized care or service. The weakest link could be in the foster care is the work with biological family, starting from organizing communication with the child and ending with social support. The child's communication with biological parents is normally organized by social service center at the premises of the foster parents. It's difficult sometimes to interact with children who have addiction or mental problems. In those cases, foster parents remain to be alone facing all those problems with all the conflicts that might happen in such situations. At the same time, the biggest interest of communicating with the biological family came not from the local officials, but from the foster parents themselves. Actually, the foster parents surveyed, they were trying to work as social support professional. They try to encourage the biological family members. And there were even cases when a foster mother tried to actually engage the biological parents into treatment. So, from the social services, most of what we heard is they, advised to organize different services, including foster care. So we were trying to actually study some of the motivational factors. Normally, people said that citizens want to try a new job or to have a new employment opportunity, and this is an employment opportunity for people with pedagogical or medical background. The key sources of information regarding foster care are mass media, posters, social social media, and other sources. There is social advertising, but it's not very popular. It's not widespread. It was also stressed that there's need to change the way they deliver this information in the media, because sometimes they talk about foster families as adoptive families, which might lead to misunderstanding in the Ukrainian society. Regarding training for the candidates of foster parents, so it's important not only for the foster parents to pass training, but also the assistants. And this training program is quite comprehensive and useful. The program actually helps learn more about the key stages of foster services delivery, and the foster parents themselves mentioned that throughout the training they'd been able to actually rethink their own experience and improve even the relationship in their families, in their original families. Also, they received a lot of useful information. The trainers are those who provided most of the support to the foster parents, not only through the training, but also in the first weeks of the child placement. Very often those trainers have chosen to actually continue to consult with foster parents in the early days of placement. An important condition is also, as reported by the respondents, is the child's reintegration in the original family. At the same time, we have some of the challenges identified. A very serious barrier is insufficient understanding of the essence and perception of this service. Like, you temporarily take the child from the family in difficult life circumstances. Sometimes it is condemned by the surrounding people, and that is especially true in the rural areas. Most of the concerns were expressed by the respondents is that the children may come from, those unfortunate families, like they call them sometimes, and there is a lack of understanding what kind of experience the child could have seen and had when living in a family with difficult life circumstances. So another important thing is that is considered to be a challenge is the training. When they have to go to the training, they sometimes need to leave the family, and it sometimes takes a long distance to get to the place where the training is delivered. Sometimes they have to travel like 150 kilometers. Apart from because there is no a proper and regular training program for the foster parents, this cannot be done on a regular basis. There needs to be regular programs developed, also supervision, etc. So the research has shown that there are so many different practices in the interdisciplinary teams. A lot depends whether those members of interdisciplinary teams have passed all the trainings or not. That actually really affects their understanding of the foster care in general. So there's need to actually train all the professionals engaged in foster care with no exclusion. All the respondents also mentioned that very often this depends on the interest of the service for children. There's also long breaks in the payment sometimes. Sometimes it's a month, and sometimes it is even 3 months. And this is actually a challenge. Because sometimes the child comes without anything, without any support, without any financial allowances. And then in one of the cases, one of the families had received the money only after 2.5 months. Sometimes respondents reported that services for children and the social service centers are not being active enough, so which leads to a situation that they know there are foster families available in their community, but no children are placed to them. Okay, in some of the issues for discussion, there were very diverse opinions expressed. You can see them on the slide. First of all, this is the status of the foster parent. This is an issue of concern for the foster parents themselves because there is no clear status that they have on the legislative basis, and there's need to actually introduce this foster parent as a profession. Placement of children from different families. Most of the respondents reported against this kind of provision because that might be really challenging to adapt different children from different families, and it might be really challenging to be working with different biological families at the same time. Placement of a child from another community, that's also a challenge. It means that there are certain organizational challenges. Who's going to work with the biological family then if the family stays in a different community? And what there is an emergency child in the same community which requires foster care. Also, payment for the services of foster parent during the period when no child is placed. That's a situation that's really difficult. We don't have any provisions about that, and we've had some diverse opinions about this. Some of the respondents said, okay, they only have to pay us for what we do, but most of them, however, mentioned that if the family, the foster family, since the foster family has to be ready to receive a child at any stage and at any time, some financial support has to be provided to those families at all times. Also, combining the training of foster parents with the training of adopting parents and parents caregivers. Also, opinions were different. More practices have to be studied, and in most of the cases, this has to do with training schedules, when they need to combine the different assignments. During the study, we have surveyed the biological parents whose children came back to them. And only those parents who had successful practices agreed to participate in the survey. So all of them, because only those participated, they reported only positive experience. They had been learning about their children, about their health, and whether they were given food, they could talk to their children. They said the foster parents inspired them and had consulted them and helped later on how to create the better family environment for the child. It's interesting that all the biological parents surveyed had been afraid to put their child in a different family, and they had a bigger fear about that than regarding placing the child to the institution. But in our communication with the biological parents after their children came back, they were no longer afraid of these services, and they would advise others taking advantage of those services. All the foster children mentioned that they had received very good experience of family life, family tradition, good relationship in the family, and it influenced their future life. It was important for them when their opinion was heard. They were asked questions regarding what they thought. All of them underlined that they had learned a lot during their stay. Where they learned how to cook, they learned how to communicate, how to analyze their behaviors, and the most important thing is that they had felt like their children who are taken care of. The big emphasis in our research, and you can find a lot more information, as a result of the survey, we drawn results, recommendations, and they will be elaborated and processed by this Minister of Social Policy, and then they'll be reflected in their practical work. Thank you very much. It's so nice to hear some of the practical experience, which is positive. I can see that the research clearly and firmly supports the vectors that foster care has to be pursuing in Ukraine, and it outlined the gaps as well. I'd like to ask Irina, now, what impressed you most of all in the course of the research? We were impressed by several things. First of all, we were impressed by foster parents and their attitude to the biological parents. We were also impressed by how they had seen support to the biological parents, even later, after the children go back, and how concerned and how bitter their feelings were if they couldn't return the child back to the biological family, and therefore the child had to be institutionalized. So they still remember all those children, and they had been talking about every single feature of the child they took care of. So they are really engaged into what they do. We're also impressed by the biological parents because over a short period of time, they had changed their opinion and attitude, because foster care lasts between 3 and 6 months, and their difficult life circumstances had not appeared yesterday. They lived with that situation probably for a long time, but they had to reevaluate, like they said, their entire life because of the situation. Okay, every single case is unique, of course, and it's all very much individualized. So it's important to find a key to every single person who is placed for foster care. So among the children that we surveyed, they're all happy about their experience. So where can we find this full version of the research? Yes, of course, you can find it. It's going to be available next week. It's going to be on the Ministry of Social Policy's website. There is a special page dedicated to our initiative, so we're happy to actually share this full report with you. There are so many cases about all the phases of foster care. So yes, that is very impressive information that you've shared with us. So what's going to be the next step after this research? Well, as it is published, then together with the Ministry of Social Policy, we will together develop recommendations, and hopefully they will then be reflected in the ministry's activity. Thank you very much for your comments and your presentation. We've heard a lot about foster care in Ukraine. I've heard some of the statistical data and the survey results. We have heard the opinions from the foster parents, public officials, and experts. But it's important to understand now what's going to come next, what's going to be the follow-up. How will the Ministry of Social Policy pursue and try to develop foster care in Ukraine? And my question now goes to Ruslan. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my words of sincere gratitude for today's presentation and for this research, for this outstanding work that you've done together. And most importantly, we should actually say a lot of thanks for the steps and for the work that you've been doing for 5 to 7 years, when you just first showed the foster care model, when you were presenting this model not just to the ministry but also to the members of parliament and top government agencies. I can still remember 2012, in 2012 we were having our first discussions regarding foster care and where should we take those foster parents from. We were thinking, okay, maybe social services will take care of that. And every time we were facing certain challenges that okay, that should be a person that is employed permanently, or that is a child who stays at, or that is a person who stays at home and works as a foster parent. Then it was something mixed with social services. And then they said, okay, that's not a social service, but that's the way of upbringing children. For quite a while, we had to rethink everything. We've seen gaps and problems, and thanks to the organizations who've been working with us, who have convinced us already, and not only ourselves, but everybody, they've been reaching out to the regions. They try to convince local governments about this. And thanks to this huge support from our partners, and I want to thank you very much, we've now had these studies, the researches, surveys. So it took a while to understand everything. We can see the gaps, we can see the good things, but we as the ministry, we need to change the rules. If that's about the resolution of the cabinet that clearly regulates some of the things like payment, if the payments are regulated by different resolutions, and once the child is placed, okay, the child is placed tonight. Or first of all, the child was taken to a medical facility and then the child was referred to a foster family. So why shouldn't the payments arrive on time? Because the system is not yet ready for it. So we first of all need to send an application. It goes from top level to from bottom level to the top. And we realize that it takes sometimes 30 to 45 days while the child is placed, no payments are coming. So we need to develop more sophisticated mechanisms. So right now there is a draft cabinet resolution in the pipeline already, which is not introducing changes, but it's a complete revision of the entire foster care procedure. And one of the elements of it is the allowances that have to be provided to the foster families. Because once the foster parent agreement is signed, there should be a certain amount of money which has to be paid. For instance, it's going to be like the 2 minimum living wages that is transferred, or let's say that can be pending until gets accrued to the family account. But once the child is placed, then this money is actually allocated. If the child is not placed, the money can be reversible. I mean, you never know. There should be a proper funding mechanism in place. Why should there be an opportunity for the money to be able to go back? Well, because it's a more sustainable mechanism. Well, again, we were saying, why aren't there so many children that are placed to foster care? Or so we have to think about those procedures as well, and to cover the most specific cases. Now, regarding responsibility, when we started, we had been talking either this is a placement or this is a service. It's just about rhetoric, but we need to streamline this rhetoric, not to create problems, but to create opportunities. We're now talking about decentralization, and services for children should be decentralized, and they need to be responsible for it. The service is not always agreeing with everything. They sometimes try to argue, but I think there should be one single institution in control of everything. It should be the service for children. The person sends an application regarding the placement. But again, that's all about procedures. There are so many small procedures that have to be followed. It's all about red tape. So I'm sure we need to clearly define and develop all the procedures. When does the application arrive? Who does it go to? Who it is processed by? What's the deadline? Who the information has to be forwarded to? Maybe we should actually develop stricter but more clear and transparent procedures. If the foster parents, for instance, so that the foster parents can understand what they can expect. Or sometimes there are foster parents, but there are no children that are placed to them. But why not? definitely that's a tricky situation because the children that are about to be institutionalized are there, but they are never sent to the foster care families. So I think that's still a lot of work to do. We need to coordinate our activities. It is also important to solve the issue, and the resolution will hopefully do that, regarding funding. Because if a foster parent is not a servant, and nor it is an employee of the institution, so how should we then define the status? Should there be any time between the placements for this foster parent to actually take a rest and prepare for the next child? And should that be paid for as well? And once the child is placed, okay, how much time do those foster parents have to actually take care of all the issues? Because so I think we need to change the procedures and have them improved. We've done it together with our partners, and there's already a draft resolution. It was already presented to the government committee meeting, and it was also updated by the commissioner for the children's rights. And it's going to go for another submission to the government. I mean, so it's not going to be going all around the regions. So hopefully it is already about to be out of the pipeline. So it's going to be in the second government reading very soon. And then we will start raising awareness. Because with this draft resolution, the procedures are more consistent and more in line with the best practices. And indeed, it is focused on more support for the foster parents and also for them to have their own rights for resting, for getting their payments on time, and etc. Tanya, did you want to add anything?
Thanks. Thanks, Olis. Yeah, I agree with everything that Ruslan has said. And I think these are really important issues for us to delve into. And I just wanted to mention how we plan to go forward with the ministry as well. We have a working group, and we want to look at each one of these issues over the coming weeks in more detail, because obviously we can only give an overview of what the research is today. But there's so many things to discuss, whether we're talking about support to foster families themselves, to people who offer to be foster families, for the training, for the payments, but also the broader system and how we work with social services in order to return children to their families. So there's a huge amount to work through. And so I wanted to mention this to the audience, that we hope that they'll tune in as well to understand where we're going with this, and also to contribute their thoughts on how we might move forward. I think this is such
and celebrate the progresses.
Yeah. And I think it's such an amazing service, and Ukraine should be proud that it's created this service. And this is a huge step forward. And I think one positive thing perhaps about, let's say, the stage of development that we're in right now is that we have an ability to build the system correctly, to make sure that this is a safe system for children, and that it works for everybody, because we are dealing with children here who cannot speak for themselves, and it's a heavy responsibility that we all have to make sure that they're safe and protected and have everything they need to thrive.
Thank you very much. Pani Василина?
Vasilina, I just want to say a couple of words. First of all, I want to express my words of sincere gratitude to our partners for initiating the research. For us, as for the organization that had started this process from scratch, we found a lot of interesting points in the research. And it's very important that it was not ourselves who did the research, but it was the search project. So all the issues that Irina just mentioned, for us, they will also become a foundation for our follow-up work. Ruslan already mentioned some of the fundamental and basic things that the ministry is trying to change today. But we are also planning to continue our work to improve and change things, because life gets changed. There are many reforms underway in Ukraine. And there are some of the points that I would like to underline. We can see those cases that exist in foster care. They are more or less complex rather than medium complexity. I mean, they're all difficult. And one of the issues that we would like to continue developing is how to provide support through those highly specialized professionals that are very specific to their subject matters. And those people are not available in rural areas, in small communities. However, they are very important. And there's another important issue, and I was listening to all the panelists today. That's probably an issue where we can never find a one-size-fits-all answer. Somebody said, yes, it's too far away to travel to that training. And another person said, oh, that's a great opportunity to have a training like this because I met so many good people. Somebody says, okay, let's do it on work days. Somebody says, no, let's do it on the weekend. You know, those are very radical differences in the answers of the people regarding training. But I think we need to find a new format. In this case, given we have this experience of working online, maybe some part of the training can be handled online so that people can actually learn more and even self-learn sometimes. We have another challenge these days in training. For instance, when we had been developing the training program, the foster care had only been planned at the district level, at rayons. Today, we are already working with the communities. And there are a lot of people coming in who have assumed their position just recently and they haven't had any experience yet. So maybe we have to train them differently regarding foster care. So we want to tackle this issue as well because we thought it would be important to work on this. We need to have more discussions, get the advice from all the stakeholders, and try to study each individual case. And I think this is going to help our partners from the ministry do a better job because there are still many issues that the ministry already tries to handle. And I want to thank you very much for those opinions that had been expressed, were already taken into account in those resolutions. I think this must become a really best practice. Whenever we develop any policy, it should be evidence-based. It has to be responsive to the challenges that are identified. So it's good that the ministry is trying to establish this practice. Thank you very much. We can confidently say that this study is a very good foundation to further build strategies and policies. I would like to thank all our panelists and participants of our meeting, and also those who made it all possible, especially those who were online with us. Hopefully, this discussion about foster care that is based on the research will be the foundation for active engagement of all the stakeholders so that the foster care service is to be available to all children and families who need them across all the communities, because foster care is to protect the most important things for the child, because this is the child-centered service. Thank you for your